Is from the Gospel according to Matthew. And in this Gospel reading, we hear a little bit about our friend and our patron saint in this community, St. John the Baptist. And I like to think of Advent as John's special time to shine, because it's a time when he tells us to prepare for the coming of Jesus. And that is really what Advent is all about. Now, when I was a kid, I remember hearing and learning that Advent was the time of the year when we were waiting for Christmas. Now, I had visions in my little kid mind about Mary, the mother of Jesus, getting ready for the birth of her baby. Kind of the same way that other mothers I knew were getting ready for the births of their own children. So in my mind, I pictured things going on like baby showers. And maybe some doctor visits, prenatal doctor visits, and maybe Mary and Joseph together were going to Lamaze breathing classes. Right? That's what Advent is about, right? It's a time when we remember that Mary and Joseph were getting ready to become new parents, and we are getting ready as a church to celebrate Jesus' birthday. And in my young little boy mind, I had a difficult time separating the religious significance of Jesus' birthday from the much more exciting experience of an annual visit from Santa Claus every Christmas Eve. And I always wondered, is this the year? Is this the one where he finally would bring me that Nintendo that I'd been asking for and that he already had brought to my friends in previous years? Now, all of those things are well and good, and the exchange of gifts is a wonderful way to celebrate the season. And in many ways, Advent is that time when we as a church are getting ready to celebrate Jesus' birthday. And there really is a whole lot going on this time of year, isn't there? It seems like every time I open my calendar, I discover that I'm late for another event. I've got things like meetings and luncheons and parties and liturgical planning. And by the way, if you happen to be a liturgical priest, I recommend contracting the COVID-19 virus at a time of year other than Advent, because I missed out on so many things that I really needed to do while I was stuck in isolation recovering from the virus. Now, only because I mentioned it, I'm happy to tell you that I never became seriously ill with the virus, and I only experienced kind of a mild irritation in the back of my throat, and I'm very happy for modern medicine, but I have recovered fully. But Advent is so much more than simply waiting for Jesus' birthday. Now, it can be good to keep it simple. And when I was a kid, that was probably the only way that I could understand what Advent meant. But now, here I am, a grown man with years of theological study under my belt, and I have to pose the question again, does Advent still mean the coming of Jesus at Christmas? And I have established a very firm answer to that question. Kinda? You see, we're reminded when we observe Advent that Jesus did come to us in the mystery of the Incarnation. And we are reminded that he came to us to be born of a woman and to live among us and to share in our humanity as he shares a little bit of his divinity with us. And we are reminded of the importance of staying awake and being prepared. And that's where our friend John comes in. That's his whole mission in his ministry, is to make sure that the people are prepared. And we are a parish named in his honor, so that's one of our duties as a parish as well. And I want to take this opportunity to say that I think you do such a good job at that. I think you do a fantastic job at sharing the good news of Jesus in the world, because all of your outreach ministries put awareness into people's hearts about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And whether they realize it or not, that awareness helps them to be prepared. And not just for the coming of Jesus at Christmas, but also for whatever is to come next. You see, that is the more complex piece of the Advent story. And I acknowledge it can sound a little morbid, because let's face it, while the fun side of Advent is full of things like Christmas trees and candy canes and cupcakes and singing carols, the other side of Advent is a reminder that our time in this world will someday come to an end. And it's important to be prepared for the end of our lives, because we don't know when, and we don't know how, and we don't know why or where it's going to happen. But we are going to die. Now, that's some fun stuff to think about, isn't it? So, is Advent about dread and despair? And the answer to that question is no. In fact, focusing on death and despair is kind of the opposite of what Advent is about. And part of the reason it makes us uncomfortable is because here in the United States in the 21st century, we don't like to think about our eventual demise. We don't like to think about death, but the church has never been uncomfortable with it. Now, if you've ever been to an old church in Europe or even on the east coast of the United States, then you know that for centuries, people have been buried right inside the church. So depending on what kind of financial gift you left behind, you ended up with a more prime burial spot inside the church. Now, the higher the donation you left when you died, the closer to the altar you would have been. You'd been buried right in here, right up here, right up here. Right? And as an example of how comfortable the church is with death, there's a place called the Catacombs in Paris that is right near the Notre Dame Cathedral. And if you go to the catacombs, you're able to walk through them, and you can see the physical remains, the bones, the skulls, everything, of more than 6 million people who were buried right there for you to see. And people go and they experience this for their entertainment and enjoyment. So not everyone is uncomfortable with death. And I think a lot of us are probably familiar with the relatively recent Disney movie called Coco. And in Coco, we are taught about the festivities of a Mexican holiday called Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead in Mexico, where people in Mexico celebrate their loved ones who have gone before them. And they do this by making candy skulls that represent their loved ones, their beloved family members. And they go to the cemetery and they have parties at the cemetery. So we're uncomfortable with death in this country because, well, let's face it, we've been fortunate it's not something we have to experience or see every day. And we kind of sanitize things. I'll give you an example. You know that room in your house that's called the living room? It wasn't always called that. Years ago, what we now call the living room was called the parlor room. And the parlor room was usually located at the front of the house. And the parlor room was where we placed the bodies of the deceased people in the household so that people could come by the house and make their final farewells before burial. Now, at some point, that was determined to be too morbid of a use for that room. And instead of a parlor room, people said, let's use it for something else. Let's not use it for the dead. Let's use it for the living. And in fact, that's what we'll call it. We'll call it a living room. Now, in modern houses, we don't even have a living room in that traditional sense. Now remember that the living room used to be that front room in your house when you'd go in. And if someone came to visit you in your living room, you could sit and entertain in the living room, and you never even needed to show them the rest of the house. Well, many new homes don't have the living room in that location anymore. In my house, which was built just a few years ago, the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen all kind of take up the same space. And the living room is more of a TV room. And the only thing that is dead in my living room this year were my hopes of Notre Dame's football team winning a national championship. And my Nintendo. And my hopes for a Nintendo. Now, I wrote this sermon, in fact, while I was sitting on my couch in my living room with my dining area just a few steps away and coffee brewing in the coffee pot. I could look at it in the kitchen, sitting from my seat on the couch. So as Americans, death makes us uncomfortable. And that's why it's uncomfortable for us sometimes to explore the ancient meanings of Advent. That's why we sanitize it and we simplify it as explaining it as a way to talk about the coming of Jesus at Christmas. And that's why the kids inside of all of us have those visions of baby showers and prenatal visits and such, because it's so much more fun to have those visions in our heads. Now, I'm kind of taking you on an emotional roller coaster here, and so now I get to tell you that it's not all about doom and gloom, because today is a day called Gaudete Sunday. Gaudete, it's Latin. And if we put our linguistic skills to work, we can figure out what this word gaudete means. So gaudete must be a verb. And how do we know that? Well, it ends in the suffix te, which if we're familiar with Latin-based languages, we know that it's a verb and it's a second-person verb. Right? So I'm telling you to do something if I say gaudete. And the first part, if we listen to it, it sounds a little bit like the word joy. Gau, joy, joy, you, joy, right? Be joyful. Gaudete is Latin, and it means be joyful, rejoice. And it comes from what we call the introit of the third Sunday of Advent, which is from Paul's letter to the Philippians, which says, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Gaudete means to be joyful. And that is why we are wearing these rose-colored vestments instead of the more frequently seen color in Advent of purple. Now, I want you to pay special attention to something. Notice I said rose-colored vestments and not pink-colored vestments. Now, how do we make that distinction between rose and pink? Why is it rose and not pink? And the answer is because Jesus rose from the dead. He did not pink from the dead. But we wear rose today. It's one of the 2 days of the year that we wear rose. The other is Laetare Sunday in the season of Lent. And we also light the third candle, which is the rose-colored candle on our Advent wreath. And these are reminders to be joyful, because we can be joyful even in death. And it's not a coincidence that we have some examples this time of year about what it means to be joyful. Earlier this week, many Christians celebrated a feast day that's known as the Immaculate Conception. Now, the Immaculate Conception does not talk about the conception of Jesus. That's the virgin birth. That's a different story. The Immaculate Conception is a feast day that celebrates that Mary was conceived without the stain of original sin, so that she could be the pure vessel to carry the Savior. Now, I think it's a way to confuse us, but if we listen to the gospel of the day on that day, the story we hear is actually the story of the Annunciation, the conception of Jesus. But that's not what the feast is about. The feast is a celebration of the Virgin Mary. Happens to take place during the season of Advent every year. And the Feast of the Immaculate Conception is a feast day that celebrates hope. But the Immaculate Conception is only one of those days of hope that we celebrate in the month of December. The feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe is coming up on December 12th. And the feast of Juan Diego, the young man to whom Guadalupe appeared, was just celebrated on December 9th. Now, Our Lady of Guadalupe gives us hope because she reminds us that salvation is available for all of us, not just the people with power. Guadalupe, believed to be an apparition of Mary, the mother of Jesus, appeared to Juan Diego in what is now that Juan Diego had seen in artwork in the churches, and seen on Mary, right? She had skin that matched his skin. It was indigenous skin. Guadalupe is the patroness of the Americas, and she reminds us that God loves all of us. Not just people who look a certain way, or dress a certain way, or act a certain way. Our Lady of Guadalupe gives us hope. A Marian prayer called the Hail, Holy Queen references Mary as our life, our sweetness, and our hope. As Christians, we do not worship Mary, but we celebrate her, and we celebrate with her. If we believe in the awesome love of Jesus Christ, then I think it's safe to say that we can believe in the awesome love of the woman who raised him. Mary is our life, our sweetness, our hope. And those events listed in our gospel readings today, the lame leaping, the blind seeing, the deaf hearing, the dead rising, those are referenced in a modern Christmas song. It repeatedly asks the question, Mary, did you know? And the answer is yes. Mary knew. Mary knew first. And she told us before anyone else did. She told us before John the Baptist did, and she told us before Jesus did. And Mary is a personal hero of mine and of many in the Christian church. And we can look to Mary and we can see someone who is truly admirable. When we celebrate Mary, we can rejoice. On a side note, when that school in Indiana, named in her honor, has a successful football season, we can also rejoice. Now, the stories of Mary and John the Baptist remind us to stay prepared for what is to come. And this is meant not as a threat, but as an opportunity. When we remain prepared, we experience the joy more fully. When we celebrate holidays like Christmas, the joy is found in the preparation because it only comes once a year. If every day were Christmas, then it wouldn't be special. If we saw fireworks every day, they wouldn't be special on the 4th of July. But we know they're coming. And if we love Christmas, we know it will arrive. Now, I know people who stockpile gifts all through the year for people they love. Right? Now, that's more prepared than I've been for anything in my entire life. Right? But some people prepare that way. And if fireworks are our thing, then we know. We have our calendars marked for the 4th of July, and we know well in advance, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be going and watching the fireworks. Right? If we happen to be fans of football, then we know well in advance that Super Bowl Sunday is approaching, and so we can start to buy those things like chicken wings and potato chips and cold drinks and make sure that our television set works, and we can test it several times while we're leading up to the game just to make sure that it doesn't conk out on us, right? Because we are prepared so that we can enjoy our special day. And in the church, Christmas is indeed one of our most special days. And it isn't a coincidence that Christmas is celebrated in December. Now, it's true that we don't know when exactly Jesus was born. We celebrate Christmas just after the winter solstice. And we hear a lot of noise saying, oh, the Christians stole that holiday from the pagans. Right? That's why it's celebrated when it is. No, that is not why Christmas is celebrated when it is. If you pay attention, every evening, it gets darker a little earlier. It gets darker and darker and darker, up until about the 20th or the 21st of December, depending on the year. But after that, it starts getting lighter and lighter and lighter. By December 25th, the light is returning. At least here in the northern hemisphere, the light is returning. The light is coming back. And Jesus, the light of the world, is coming to be with all of us. Now, the light will come whether we're prepared or not, but if we prepare properly, we'll enjoy it that much more. And we prepare by prayer and by reading the scriptures and by sharing the stories of the saints who came before us and showed us how to be prepared. And we prepare by lighting the candles on our wreath and counting down the weeks. And we prepare by wearing rose vestments and remembering to rejoice. And we rejoice today not because Christmas is here, but because it is coming. We rejoice not because we are going to die, but because we are going to have eternal life. And we rejoice not because we are worthy on our own, but because we have a loving God who created us and made us worthy. And we join with the communion of all the saints. And we continue our preparation. Because, my friends, in 2 weeks, Christmas will be here. Rejoice. Gaudete. The light is coming back. The Lord is near.